Hello and welcome to Boring Thrillers here on Fiction with Ern. Is that what the name of the channel is? Fiction with Ern? That's the best we could do. Great. I'm your host, Ernest Dempsey, and tonight I'll be reading The Courier by me, Ernest Dempsey. And by reading The Courier, I mean maybe a chapter. You know, in case you need to have some sort of soothing reading, listening to help you fall asleep. Usually, you don't want to read thrillers to fall asleep. In fact, my books often have quite the opposite effect, keeping people awake until late into the night, until their spouses start complaining that they need to turn the light off. But not this time. This time, you can just put in your headphones and listen to the melodious sounds of my buttery voice. Hopefully the speaker is a good enough quality so that in the comments I don't get a bunch of trolls complaining about the audio. And if I do, I'll probably just ignore it. Shall we begin? Chapter 1 of The Courier, in case you forgot. By the way, this is the first time I've ever read this book. I don't read my own books. I don't need to because I wrote them. Let's continue. Dak Harper stared down at the credit card on the hotel room desk, knowing he couldn't use the card until Colonel Tucker was dead. Next to the card, a stack of money sat on the desk's dark mahogany surface. To call it a stack was generous. All counted, he had $237 left in cash sitting next to his fake passport and fake driver's license. He'd been careful, double-dipping at convenience stores or markets, shuffling money around to make it nearly impossible to track. Not that the people chasing him were that good. Still, he preferred to play it safe. At his cabin back in the mountains of Tennessee, he had weapons, munitions, cash, and precious metals stored up for a rainy day, what others would say was a hitting the fan sort of contingency. I don't cuss in my books. The fan wasn't on yet, but it was plugged in with a fresh pile of manure sitting in a bucket close by. It's pretty good. I can't believe I wrote that. Even the purchase of the cabin and its property had been concealed with the greatest of care. Dak used an LLC along with a subsidiary corporation to add 2 layers of anonymity to ownership. The military had cleared his name and restored his benefits and his bank accounts. But Dak wasn't stupid enough to use them. He wasn't about to make it easy on Tucker. The former officer had essentially been Dak's boss, though that term wasn't often used. Tucker was in charge of operations near Hamrin in Iraq, and had made a series of career-ending mistakes, the first of which was wrongfully accusing Dak Harper of attempted murder and the betrayal of the men on his Delta Force team. Even when Tucker learned the truth about what really happened, that Harper had been the one betrayed and left for dead in a desert cave, the colonel pushed ahead, unwilling to admit he was wrong. That vindictiveness cost him everything. When Dak was cleared of all wrongdoing, Tucker was dismissed, given benefits, his pension, the whole 9, all in exchange for his quiet retirement. Dak knew the man did not intend to go silently. He blamed Dak for his fall from power, a collapse that blocked the colonel from climbing higher up the ladder. It was no secret Tucker had his eyes set on making general, and perhaps someday to even loftier positions within the government. Now, None of that was possible. Knowing Tucker, Dak figured the man was bent on revenge, and he wouldn't stop until his vengeance was fulfilled. With connections and resources all over the world, Tucker was more than capable of deploying mercenaries who were willing to exchange ethics and morals for 30 pieces of silver. Dak knew there was only one way he could truly be safe. That would be when Tucker was dead. Until then, Dak had to keep moving. That's why the job he'd discovered was so fortuitous. He'd saved up a few financial resources, but those reserves could run low if tapped too often, and he didn't want to risk going back to the cabin in the mountains more than necessary. Now, he needed money. He turned his head and looked out the balcony door of the condo he'd rented in Midtown Atlanta. It was one of the newer high-rises built in the last 5 years. Contemporary and modern, with clean, white paint and gray-brown hardwood flooring. The place had been purchased, he assumed, to be a rental, a common practice in the internet age when people could rent out their homes on apps and websites. 20 stories below, the bustling city of Atlanta churned with activity. It was still dark outside in the early morning, but people were already in the middle of their commute or traveling through town to get a head start on the traffic. In a few hours, Dak would meet his new employer, though he still had reservations about the in-person aspect of taking the job. For all he knew, it could be a trap, an elaborate setup by the colonel. Dak would take precautions. He always did. So far, everything checked out. But he wouldn't be let... Sometimes I mess up reading. But he wouldn't let his guard down. He scooped up the money, cards, and identification on the desk and stuffed them into his front pockets. He spun around and picked up his black tactical bag, his few belongings having already been packed. Dak traveled light, only carrying a few clean sets of clothes and the other necessities. He didn't like being on the run, always looking over his shoulder, but he was accustomed to it at this point. His former line of work had prepared him well for it. Dak only hoped that someday he could live a normal life, whatever that meant. He turned and made for the door, but paused when he saw a shadow move past the threshold on the floor on the other side. He frowned and ducked into the bathroom to the left, immediately wishing he'd grabbed one of the kitchen knives opposite him. They were 15 to 20 feet away, so close, yet so far. Dak lowered his pack down to the floor, pressing his shoulder against the doorframe as he watched the shadow linger just beyond the entrance. I lost my spot. Oh, there it is. He sighed. So much for peace and quiet, he thought. At least you know I'm not AI. The assassin didn't attempt to unlock the door. At least they were smart or aware enough to have seen the lights on in the apartment through the crack at the bottom of the door. So Dak figured. Knowing that he was awake, the killer would loiter outside the entrance in hopes of catching the target off guard as he left. Dak only waited another 10 seconds to make sure the assassin didn't try to come in. Then he emerged from his hiding place and walked across the open corridor to the kitchen. There he grabbed 2 large kitchen knives and 2 smaller ones. He also grabbed a dish towel from a silver rack by the sink. Then he went back to the door, slipping the knives into his belt before reaching the entrance. Dak quietly looped the towel around the door handle and let it dangle. He paused for a second, then flicked the light switches. The condo went dark, only dimly lit from the city lights beyond the balcony and the faint glow in the east where the sun pushed toward morning. Dak watched the shadows beyond the door shift. He knew the killer was getting into position. If he weren't mistaken, a new shadow represented a firearm, probably with a suppressor, or silencer. I know some of you gun guys and gals get all excited about that terminology. It's both. Both are used, and both are accurate. I've checked with gun manufacturers and military personnel, also police. There was no other way out than through the door. Dak would have opted for a balcony escape, but not 20 stories up. With no options, Dak crouched low near the door. The assassin would most likely be holding their weapon chest high. That's how he would do it. Dak clutched one of the kitchen knives in a fist as he reached out with his left hand and twisted the deadbolt. The lock clicked. Then he grasped the towel tied to the latch and took a breath in and yanked the rag down and back. The towel's knot held, and the door came free of the frame with another click. It swung wide open, pouring light from the hall into the darkened apartment. 3 muted pops accompanied the door's swoosh as the assassin fired blindly into the darkness. The bullets drilled through the glass balcony door, shattering it and sending huge fragments of glass down onto the floor. A pause washed into the room. Dak knew the man had to be confused. He added to the confusion by letting go of the towel. The door's pneumatic piston at the top pushed it closed onto the killer and forced the intruder to brace it with a free hand. The assassin stopped the door before it had fully closed and quickly stepped into the room, sweeping to his left first to check the kitchen. Maybe that was luck. Perhaps it was a tactical error. Either way, when the man turned left, Dak sprang from behind him and drove the kitchen knife up toward the back of the man's skull, while wrapping his other hand around the killer's forehead. So violent. It was a move he'd used several times on covert missions. The kill was always clean, momentarily, and, most important, silent. This assassin, however, was no ordinary opponent. The man sensed the movement behind him, and a split second before the blade tip reached his neck, he twisted his arm and fired the pistol under his armpit at the enemy. That's a clever move. Dak was forced to abandon his initial plan and twist to the side, narrowly dodging the bullets as they popped out of the muzzle. The counter move didn't completely deny Dak's primary attack, though, and the point of his knife slid over the back of the assassin's neck, cutting a wide slice into his flesh. The attacker seemed unfazed by the wound and continued turning until he faced Dak. He raised his weapon and met Dak's eyes. The man's short hair was in disarray, as if he'd just rolled out of bed and decided to go kill someone. That's a pretty good line. The brown eyes were the color of dark cocoa, or as some people might say, cacao. And they stared back with without remorse or doubt. The man fired 2 more shots. The bullets missed Dak's head as he twisted and backed into the door. He swiped the knife's edge down and cut a deep gash into the gunman's forearm. Ugh. It's one of those things that, you don't feel it at first, and then all of a sudden it stings really bad. The weapon dropped to the floor with a clatter. This time, the man grunted in pain. The assassin grabbed Dak's wrist with his good hand and twisted it to the side while pulling him forward. The awkward angle forced Dak to let go of the knife, and he dropped to his knees in time to free his wrist, but also catch a knee to the face. The dark room flashed with colors as the blow drove Dak against the wall. He clawed at the floor, dazed and desperate to get up. The assassin grabbed Dak by the ankle and pulled him back toward the doorway. The man quickly stomped on Dak's back. The deadening blow nearly knocked the air from Dak's lungs, and he gasped to hold on to consciousness. A fast foot swung around, directed at Dak's temple. He narrowly missed what could have been a fight-ending shot to the head by rolling drunkenly to the side. His head cleared slightly, and Dak saw an opening. Without thinking, he swung his other foot up, striking the assassin in the groin with his shin. The man groaned and doubled over as Dak bicycle kicked his other knee up into the killer's nose. The assassin shrieked and drew back. Dak pulled another knife from his belt and stabbed up at the enemy. The man recovered despite watering eyes and a bleeding nose and managed to deflect Dak's strike with the swing of a fist that struck Dak in the forearm. The second knife flew out of Dak's hand and the assassin moved in. Fists flew in a flurry of attacks and counters. The killer was fast, but he was also hurt. The man tried to grapple and get Dak into a compromising position, but Dak had seen every one of those moves before. The two danced in the living room, feet and knees swinging, blocking, dipping, and kicking. Dak landed a punch to the man's right ear and momentarily caused him to step back, but the retreat didn't last. Dak pushed toward him, but caught a right hook, a reward for his careless attack. The killer tilted and kicked, landing another blow with his heel into Dak's midsection. Dak reeled, stumbling backward over the coffee table in the middle of the room. He rolled over it, deftly landing on his feet despite the thumping ache in his gut. He breathed heavily and glowered at the assassin. "You don't have to do this, you know," Dak muttered. "You can walk out of here and the colonel will never know." "Weak," the killer grunted. "He said you had gone soft." "Bold talk from a man who isn't brave enough to come after me himself." "Perhaps," the assassin partially agreed. "But then again, if he was, I wouldn't be getting a big payday." Dak smiled. "So Tucker's found some deep pockets to help with his little project." "Stop talking," the killer said. "Time to die." Seems friendly. He surged forward. Dak whipped the first of the two smaller knives from his belt and flung it at the attacker. It tumbled by the man, narrowly missing his shoulder. The second the first knife was out of his fingers. Dak grabbed the second and threw it hard. The assassin, preoccupied with dodging the first knife, didn't have time to miss the second. The point of the blade sank into the man's chest, close to his right shoulder. The killer grimaced and stumbled toward Dak, still unwilling to give up the fight. Dak dropped one step back toward the shattered balcony door. "I see where this is going. I wrote it, but it's been a while. It's been years." The assassin winced with every stride as he charged, the blade in his chest cutting and pricking nerves amid the bumps. Dak braced himself for impact. The assassin tackled him, running Dak through the jagged remains of the door with a crash. He grabbed at Dak's shirt, and Dak did the same, except Dak let himself fall onto the balcony floor. In one fluid motion, he rolled back and kicked his feet up, planting his heels in the killer's midsection. When Dak pushed his legs out, the assassin vaulted over the railing. I thought that's what was going to happen. The last thing Dak saw in the man's eyes was sheer terror as he felt nothing but air beneath him. Dak rolled over and watched the body tumble downward until it hit the street below, right in front of a parked bus. Not a school bus. One of those tourist buses, probably, or maybe a city bus that didn't have anybody inside yet. It was early morning. Dak struggled to his feet and stumbled back through the broken door into the living room. He looked around the previously spotless apartment. He sighed and returned to the bathroom where he'd left his bag, scooped it off the floor, and then picked up the dead assassin's pistol. He stuffed the gun into his belt and pulled his Nirvana t-shirt down over it, then opened the door. Panning the room one more time, he shook his head. "No way I'm getting that deposit back," he grumbled. Then Dak stepped out into the corridor and let the door close behind him. Thank you for joining me for Boring Thrillers. I'm Ernest Dempsey, and this has been an excerpt, Chapter 1, of The Courier. You can pick up a copy of The Courier as well as all of the other Dak Harper novels on Amazon through the link in the description and in the pinned comments. If you'd like to hear more boring thrillers like this, I'm happy to do so. Simply leave a comment, maybe like the video, subscribe, and share it with a friend that you think needs to hear some relaxing, melodious reading of thrillers before bedtime. I'm Ernest Dempsey. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video.